Hey folks, how you doing? You know who it is, your favorite person here with the NAMCA Podcast. I have an amazing guest for you all today. Remember to lock in, tune in, and anyone you think who might benefit from the conversation we're about to have, the man, the myth, the legend that is which is Steve Bodei, I'm going to be bringing up shortly. If you are in the field of student affairs and you're looking to grow, develop, kind of understand, a little bit of what happens behind the scenes and how you can thrive and learn in the field, then this is absolutely the place for you. So without further ado, dramatic entry, please welcome Steve Bodei. Steve, how you doing? Good morning, good afternoon.
Good, great. It's great to be here. Thanks again, Stan, for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise, appreciate you for being open to the conversation. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to do this. Just brag on yourself. I want you to unapologetically let us know who you are and where you are and just how awesome you are. Feel free to do that. Spare no expense. Who's Steve Bodei?
Right, yeah. So something that doesn't come easy to me, for sure. Try and be as humble as I can, but student affairs professional, I've been in the field for about 14 years now, working in a lot of different places, as far as working mainly in housing, but always kind of having this lens towards student leadership and student leadership development. So real excited in a lot of those attributes to work with students kind of growing in the leadership space. So I've been fortunate to work most of my career at the University of Michigan here in Ann Arbor, and developing and growing a lot of our great programs as well. One of the exciting things from my career perspective is really about the facet of being able to start in positions that never existed before, where you kind of don't have any roadmap, and someone maybe at the top said, "Hey, we have this great idea, we have some thoughts about this," and throw the idea out there, and we're going to create a position. And so me trying to be strategic and thinking about how I've kind of fallen into those positions in my career, kind of at all of my stops where there's really something new that I need to take on and learn how to do that and develop it and work with a lot of students and stakeholders to really make things happen and progress from really not having a super clear vision or idea of what the end game is supposed to be, but wanting to do those things. So I've been very fortunate again to have that in my career, and I think I've done a lot of great work to just kind of develop that skill set to further things at the places where I've been.
Thank you for sharing that. That's going to lead me to, that skill set piece I definitely want to touch on. But before that, you mentioned, falling into, which I think can happen quite a bit in higher ed and student affairs. Did the career of student affairs, did it find you? Did you find it? Did you know that this world existed? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, as you know, and most people who are listening, who are in kind of the career field of student affairs, there wasn't necessarily a workshop in college or recruiter event for, hey, who wants to work in student affairs? Like this is the jobs you go for. So definitely fell into it. So I went to school to be a high school history teacher. Loved everything about teaching, just maybe not all the other kind of components of it that kind of happen behind the scenes. And so, I was one of those people, like most student affairs folks talk about, who I played soccer in college, so I was heavily involved in athletics, and I was an RA, so I was heavily involved with housing and doing programming with our student activities and those pieces. And that just always kind of felt like it came easy and natural to me and wasn't a lot of work. And so just really kind of fell into it that way. And then, I got done with teaching, went back to grad school, and, I really said to myself, Stan, I said, I don't know what I want to do, right? Which is what our students often kind of come with, right? And I tell them still, I don't know what I want to do, right? Like I haven't decided this is exactly, the thing for me forever, or where the road will take me. But really wanted to get a degree that was as broad as possible. So I got a master's in leadership and public administration, which really I felt like applies to anything, right? But really is where I grounded and got some of my excitement and focus around leadership and kind of leadership development that I've been able to tie throughout my career. And then so doing that degree, I was able to be an assistant men's soccer coach and also a hall director. And then doing both of those things, like getting up every morning, really just felt pretty good, right? Like I know I'm going to do something that's going to be completely different every day. It's going to be interesting. And I'm going to get to work with young people who are, in this stage of life where they're really excited about kind of what comes next for them. So yeah, definitely fell into it. Wasn't like I was telling someone not too long ago, like, oh yeah, it was a question at a meeting with like an icebreaker, and they said, what did you want to be when you grew up? And I jokingly was like, well, when I was 5 or 6, I had this realization that I wanted to be a leadership educator. Where most people, say fireman or whatever, but that was just something that I was saying, but that's how I kind of got into this work.
Thank you for sharing that and the transparency, because the truth is sometimes folks feel like they have to have it all figured out, and you don't. Just kind of go along this process called life, asking questions along the way, finding new versions of yourself. So I certainly appreciate you mentioning that. And also the skill set. Now you mentioned obviously a collegiate athlete, a history teacher is kind of what you were going towards earlier. It seems like part of those skill sets are interacting in a team atmosphere, assists, if you will, no pun intended, with a particular skill set. That being said, for those in the field that, I don't know, sometimes may feel frustrated or bogged down, or for new folks popping into the field that want to do well and enjoy it, what are some skill sets that they should develop as often or as much as possible?
Yeah, there's a lot. And one of the things I do want to kind of give praise to is all of my housing friends out there. So those of us that kind of work in the housing world, especially these past couple of years with multiple pandemics and things that are going on, it really is it's really challenging. But I do want to kind of give praise again to that skill set that I developed as working as a housing professional, and that you just see so many different things and you interact across so many different dimensions, right? And sometimes one I think is reflection, right? Which is something I try really hard with our students to work on, is like, how do you find intentional time for yourself to reflect on the skills that you've actually gained? Right? Because often as student affairs professionals, it's go, put out this fire, go to the next thing. And sometimes then we don't actually realize, like, stop and think to ourselves, like, wow, like that, I actually did a lot of, like, that took a lot of conflict management, what I just handled there, And so sometimes in my career, I've actually journaled for myself, right? Like I've had an experience with students or parents or faculty or whatever, and doing some journaling of like, how did that go for me? What would I do differently in the process moving forward? And so I think that's part of something to think about. I do also think that resilience, especially now, kind of given where we all are, is thinking about that. I'm thinking about, what are your kind of, and for everyone, it's kind of different, right? Mm-hmm. So and how they handle those setbacks or things that go well or don't go well, right? So, a good example is that my partner and I always joke about is, I applied for a job. I was an internal candidate. It didn't work out my way. I didn't get it. The next morning I woke up and ran like 6 miles, right? And I don't run like 6 miles typically, Stan.
I was going to ask. I didn't see that in the bio.
Right. But I was super angry, I was just really upset about it. And then I ended up getting back. I got sick, and then I took the day off of work. So, but that was me earlier on in my career. And so learning then, like from that experience, like, okay, this is not a reflection of who I am or me solely as my person that I didn't get this position. And so then how do I provide myself different perspective on those things? And that's kind of what I'm talking about in the resilience landscape of sometimes we have a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, right? Of where we should be or how we should progress or some of those other things. And sometimes those pieces are just outside your control. And so how do you navigate that with both, okay, how could I have maybe done better in the interview or better prepared? And also let go of the fact that, yeah, maybe they just thought this individual was a better fit, or maybe there's another door that's going to open for me later on. And that's like some perspective that I've gained with that resilience piece, and kind of then how you bounce back in a healthy way, right? Because I would say running 6 miles is not the healthiest way, unless that's what you do.
Untrained, unready. I'm just going to run this thing.
Right, right, exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was like, I'd probably do a mile or two here and there at that point, but a little bit different. Yeah.
I'm feeling very inadequate. Gonna be honest. I'm gonna at least take a walk today. I'm inspired.
Right.
Do something, maybe a light jog. I appreciate and also saying the in a healthy way, bounce back in a healthy way. That intentional language, because some folks feel like bouncing back could be bouncing back, but in a way that's harmful or detrimental to who they're really working towards. And even it's definitely the ability and the skill set to control what you can control, and having the conversations that you're mentioning, like maybe this candidate was better and maybe I can improve on this end, which also helps the sanity sake of things going on. And I don't know if are there any jobs you feel like, let's say outside of student affairs, and I'll make it make sense, that you think everyone should have? Like, do you ever see, like, if everyone had this job at least once, they'd be better human beings?
Yeah, I mean, it is hall director or RA, right? Like, and really that is, and some, like for instance, working at Michigan, we focus a lot on social justice, restorative justice, those pieces, right? And really taking identity and those perspectives into account. And because you just experience so many different things and you work with different people, your ability to then handle things is a lot different. It's very interesting, because now if I experience something that's maybe, like unexpected or out of the norm, or even a crisis situation, it's funny how I just kind of like snap to, right? Like I have that already trained in my mind, like, okay, what's step one? How do I manage this process? How do I go through these pieces, right? Yes. It's kind of, and I think that's some of it too, is thinking about, the skills for higher ed professionals and some of those things. It's like, how do you collect, right, a more like holistic set of skills? And I think one piece of that too is like having the interest and the want to learn, right? Like what may be outside of your realm. Because sometimes I think it can be very easy in the higher ed realm to be like, okay, I'm only going to read like literature that's in the Chronicle, and I'm only going to read, these higher ed faculty members and their student development theory, right? But like, it's really important, and I've found like throughout my career to take things from business, like take things from the arts, like take things from other athletics, right? So, playing sports, there's been things that I did as an athlete that I brought into, my more student affairs kind of realm, and vice versa, right? So how do we bring more of those things in and then have that kind of like keen interest of learning, right? That helps further our perspective.
Whoa, thank you for that. It's funny because it's certainly in my top 3 to 5 for sure. A lot of people say server, they should work in a restaurant, those kind of. Hall directors and RAs see things that the general public has never seen. It's like working in different industries, again, mentioning social justice, or in government work regarding, intimate partner abuse and what goes on in courts, and what people, with the layman, for lack of a better word, they never see that. Maybe on TV, but maybe then it's sensationalized. But the people who are RAs and hall directors see something that most people never get a chance to see. So that's, maybe there's, in some schools, maybe they do that, where there's, higher ed folks do some RA training, but because they absolutely do see things that other people do not see.
Yeah, and I think too, it's the interpersonal, right? So, the more, it's just like any other habit or exercise. The more you interact with different people, who share beliefs and ideologies different than your own, or are dealing with things that, you struggle with necessarily yourself, or some of these other pieces, family dynamics, lots of these things that kind of take place in these conversations that a lot of folks in those roles have, then really either provides you perspective, or you develop and train yourself in that skill of how to have that type of conversation. Where if you have, if you've had a conversation, if you've been forced through your job to have a conversation about race, it's often a little bit easier than when you need to have a conversation with your family about race, because you've already done some of that work to begin with,
Yeah. Talk about I appreciate that. It's interesting how those steps happen. Go, oh, wow, I've had this happen over here. Now I can literally transfer this skill set, this experience to other places, conversations, and people to make difficult conversations more easy to have. Really cool. Along your journey, you mentioned 14 years, correct? You hear that? 14 years. Awesome.
I know I don't look it, right?
At all. I'm saying I'm fresh out of college. That's all I'm saying. So during that time, has there been anyone that's really had a profound impact on your career, and you're like, you know what? Yeah, this is I rock with this person.
Yeah, and I had some inclination that you were going to ask a question like this, and so I did have some reflecting on it. And I think one thing I would say too, and when I've worked with either students or colleagues or young professionals, kind of thinking about it from the lens of taking something from different people that really helps identify who you are, right? Like we do this activity where we have kind of people think about leaders in their life, right? And what skills or attributes did they appreciate about, people who really stood out, right? Like you said, had a really big impact on them. And then kind of like whittling that down for themselves, right? And then how does that show up in their own leadership? And I think that's been something for me, is that I don't have this like one person who I'm like, you know what, this person, it was transformative. Like, and that doesn't mean that there weren't like transformative mentors or people in my life, of course. But I think what I've tried to do, hopefully, to best represent those people is take some bits and pieces from each kind of person who I've worked with, and then implement those in different ways through my own kind of style of leadership, right? So, and that's coaches that I've had, right? Like in the athletic realm, that's supervisors who I've had in the past, mentors, friends, colleagues, students sometimes, right? Because we have as much to learn from them as they have to learn from us. So it's really, just thinking about how do I, reflect on some of those experiences, acknowledge like what they did for me or how that made me feel, and then try and like put my own, flavor on that for then when I'm in that position with others.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That makes so much great sense. So for those of y'all listening, watching at some point, listening at some point, there are pieces that you can take from all of your experiences. And heck, I find myself, sometimes you learn from people that you don't necessarily love. I'll use that word.
That's absolutely right. Yep. Sometimes, you learn or you have a conflict or a student who's like really, really, kind of your personalities don't align or whatever. But then, you learn something from that experience, and actually that's something that you apply in the future for sure.
The personalities don't align. Amazing way of saying that. I love that. that word judo right there. In terms of, I know part of it, a couple more questions, I'll let you go, I promise. So, sometimes, a part of, what you do is, bringing in speakers, performers, or, people who do that. What makes someone attractive to for you to trust them with your student population or your staff? And what are some things that you'd be like, you know what, definitely don't do this, or I'll probably never work with you? Are those things that kind of jump at you at all?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes too, I have a hard time with this because of the identities that I hold, kind of as a white man, the privilege that I bring to the table. And so sometimes, I really try and take that perspective of how will, the speaker, whoever we're bringing in, how will they take that into account, right? Have they done like some of their own self-work to think about how their identities show up and may play out in an audience or a particular culture or environment. So I might ask some questions about that. And then also like just really thinking about, are they taking current climate and other situations into account, right? So a speaker who says like, yeah, actually I haven't changed anything from 3 years ago, and now I'm going to come in and present the same content and information as if it was 2019 again. Probably not someone we want on our campus, right?
Yeah.
And so, really thinking about that, but asking some of those like harder questions, right? Like, so how, for instance, a couple of years ago, we brought an author who wrote a book, and in the book, there wasn't like a ton of female examples, right? Or women that kind of, where they were talking about women as these kind of leadership examples. And so asking like a targeted question, like, okay, like in your talk though, we want to ensure that like people in the audience can like see themselves through what you're talking about. So how would you provide a diverse set of examples that emphasizes the points that you're trying to make? So I think some of those questions and seeing what responses those elicit provide perspective and understanding so that we know that as best we can, we try and set up an environment where students will gain from the experience and then also make sure that harm will not be done, right? Because the worst thing you can do is bring a speaker in and then you're, having to do dialogues afterwards or facilitate conversations because of what this person shared or some of those other pieces.
That's really thoughtful. That's amazingly thoughtful in that not just who the person is, but how they may show up or present whatever their feelings, vibe, cultural understanding is really profound. And the other thing, obviously, there's new folks who are going to listen to this or watch this at some point. What advice do you have for them? Because I know sometimes getting in, and I remember starting in student affairs, and then there was this in fine print, it said other duties as assigned. I didn't know what that stood for. I was like, oh, that's cool.
You carried 50 to 75 pounds of weight, right?
Couldn't be more random of a question.
Right.
With 50 cents. Oh, wow. Okay. So if what advice do you have for new folks who are just getting started, they want to be great, or they just want to enjoy student life?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have kind of gained this perspective over the last 18 months or a little bit longer, is that like and I think often people, the thing I do appreciate about student affairs is that it is pretty frequent that people get into it because they have a passion for it and they truly care, right? Which is good, right? Like other professions like nursing or things like that, right? Because we all joke about this, but it's not like you're gonna make a ton of money, right? So it's not like you're just totally motivated by greed, I hope, because of what we often get paid, at least when you start out, right?
Yeah.
And your cup though gets filled by other things, right? By the interactions you have with colleagues, passion, and some of those other things. And so I think, some of the advice is that like thinking about the perspective of like, where do you fall on the line of I live to work or I work to live, right? And everyone kind of needs to decide for themselves, like, it is my, and when you start off in your career, and especially for me, like my job was very much a big part of my life. Now, as I got older and had other things take place, had a family and some other responsibilities, priorities can shift and change, right? A little bit too. And so I think thinking about that and examining it for yourself as you are earlier on in your career, however you identify early, right? Because people enter the career field at all different stages of the game. So I think just really examining that and thinking about it, because in higher ed and in certain areas of student affairs, it can be really easy to just work all the time, right? And I think you have to find a way to figure out what that balance is for you, because it can be easy to respond to emails at 8 p.m. as a young professional. Well, my boss sent an email at 8 p.m. So in fact, I just saw this yesterday. I was reflecting on this actually. A supervisor sent an email like, hey, I'm going to be out of the office tomorrow. They sent it at 8 p.m. new young professional responded, "Oh, thanks for letting us know," like at 8:23 p.m. So again, like, you know, just right sizing that for yourself. And then, you know, I think thinking about where, as work changes as a young professional, find a place to work that is changing in the way that you want to work, right? And sometimes when you enter the field, it can be easy to be like, well, I got this position, so it's not working out, but I'll just kind of hang around. And even though it's not a good environment or I'm not treated a certain way, just start applying immediately. Would be my recommendation, you know, like, don't wait, right? Because again, I think we know that you have a limited amount of time just to work in general. And so how do you, you know, think about that for yourself, right? So that you are, you know, could I do something tonight for myself versus responding to these emails or working on this project that's not due for a bit, or any of those things? Because what happens, I think, if you don't do that, like in any career, then burnout is pretty easily coming down the road, right? Because you've just worked all the time. You've had a lot of challenges, etc. And then you get to a point where it's like, no, I think I'm going to go into finance because I'll just work with numbers and I don't have to deal with these conflicts and like these different dynamics and whatever.
Wow.
So I know, hopefully that made some sense.
That made great sense. And I think the point you made about, you know, deciding early if you're going to live to work or work to live, and creating those boundaries early. Because as we know, once you create the habit, the longer you get into your career and those boundaries aren't set, and maybe rumors starts to spread that you don't have boundaries. So it's really going to overwhelm you now, especially because you love what you do and you're good at it. It happens often. So that was a great point, not just for folks who are new in the field, but seasoned folks who are trying to establish boundaries finally. So Steve, thank you very much for being here, for taking time out of your day away from obviously work and family to spend time with the NAMCA podcast. Any final words you have before we get out of here?
No, I mean, I think thanks again for having me. I appreciate it. If there are folks out there that it would be helpful to connect, you can always find me on LinkedIn. But I think it's great to have a set of kind of diverse voices, which is, I think, what you're collecting for professionals in the field to kind of get some perspective and understanding. So thanks again for having me, Stan. I really appreciated our conversation today.
An absolute pleasure. Look forward to staying in contact. Thank you so very much for all of y'all who tuned into the NAMCA podcast. Make sure it's a habit to do so. We're going to be launching officially soon. You can certainly watch this via Facebook in some kind of channel if you end up watching it, or certainly listening to it on the NAMCA podcast. That being said, remember that you're good, you're great, you're worth it. And we don't have to be perfect. We just simply have to make some progress, because effort on fire beats knowledge on ice. This is Stan for a second. You're here first. Have a good one. Thank you.